was asked to come and talk to you about a new insect pest of soybeans that we've been experiencing the last several years in the southeast, and I'm going to do so. The first thing I've got here is I bought a little time-lapse camera and stuck it on a fence post and pointed it at a soybean field. And we planted, and we took a picture every day. Anybody, you ever seen that before? It's kind of interesting. I'll just play it. It only takes like 15 seconds for it to show you the whole season. You'll notice some weeds there as my technician kind of comes in and mows the weeds down. They grow back up real fast and he mows them down. So let's just play that. I don't know how well you can see this back there. You can notice all the rain we had in South Carolina because it often was raining. Anyhow, that's a whole soybean crop. 15 seconds, I thought was pretty neat. All right, click the next one. All right, so we're going to talk about kudzu bugs. As I mentioned, we've been experiencing this insect for several years now in the southeast, and I'm going to kind of take you through just about the entire history of it being here and what we found out about it. First of all, go out on a limb, make a prediction. You guys will get kudzu bug. You don't have it yet, but you will get it. It will become established. It'll be a nuisance pest, and it's going to be a pest of soybeans. It's just a matter of time. Out on the sign-up table out front, there are some publications that the United Soybean Board helped us put together, and it's kind of a good introductory piece on kudzu bugs. So pick up, I think I brought 130, so grab them while they're still out there. There are some other sources of information. You go to these websites, there's an up-to-date map of the distribution. It's updated regularly, so you can check that out. There's some other information there about kudzu bugs. All right, just a little bit about the species and what it looks like. You've got egg masses laid in 2 rows. The immatures hatch from those and develop through 5 instars, much like stink bugs, and before they become adults. Give you an idea about the size of the adults. They're about the size of an eraser on a pencil, about the same size as a lady beetle. Just some other shots of the immatures and the adults, the male and female, and the egg mass. It's unlike anything else you will see in soybeans. Now, you will see this insect in large numbers on non-legume hosts. It'll rest on anything in large numbers and almost look like it's feeding and hurting that host plant. But its preferred host are legumes. Soybeans, kudzu is a legume, wisteria is a legume, peanuts is a legume, but interestingly, this insect doesn't like peanuts. You can find it on peanuts, but it doesn't use it as a reproductive host. So kudzu is its preferred wild host, and the kudzu bug, incidentally, is not its approved common name. That's just what we call it because if you go in a kudzu patch, it's in the kudzu patch in an infested area. So you're going to find it on kudzu first. It's actually a good guy on kudzu. There's a published paper already that it reduces kudzu growth by 30%. So it's actually a biocontrol agent of kudzu. It's not going to eradicate kudzu, not going to get rid of kudzu. It just feeds on it and slows the growth down. Kudzu occurs in a very large portion of the United States, pretty much where we grow soybeans, the whole eastern half of the country. So those 2 hosts overlap nicely for this insect. You can find it early. This is an early May picture. Those are just early vegetative soybeans like V2, and they're just covering every stalk in the field. So they can get pretty abundant quick. And at the end of the season, they can be really, really thick if you don't do anything about it. Here are just some sweep net numbers. I mean, literally in a dozen sweeps, you can have several thousand of these insects in an infested area. Can you click? This is another video. This is a video one of my graduate students took about, a dozen sweeps in an infested area of this field. It's pretty dramatic. You see these things just boiling out of the sweep net. All right, this is where kudzu bug is from. It's from Asia. That's where we get a lot of our invasive species. Very nice of them to provide those for us. The one we have is probably from Japan. There's some genetic evidence, and looking at the micro endosymbionts, it seems to indicate what we have came from Japan. But they've been here since 2009. They're found on some homes next to a kudzu patch. This insect likes the color white, so it's going to be on your truck if it's white. It's going to be on your house. The trim work if it's white, and that's where it was found initially. It was limited to these 9 counties in northeast Georgia in 2009. We checked around, and this was the limit of its distribution in late 2009. This is a picture of where we got with the distribution of this insect the end of last year, 2013. It's in multiple states, all the way in completely infested South Carolina, North Carolina, most of Georgia, all of Alabama. It's into Mississippi, and it's over to the river, and it's just a matter of time before you got it here in Arkansas. Some of the limitations, as you can imagine, for distribution of this insect, probably the mountain ranges here, but it's going to be just a matter of time before this thing funnels up and gets into some big soybean acres, and then it'll be limited probably by temperature only. Right now you can find this insect overwintering. It overwinters much like a lot of our species of stink bugs, wherever it can get to survive the temperatures, and that's under leaves, behind bark, in your attic, just wherever the insect can get. You can find it around windows. You can find it very abundantly in and around homes where you've got infested plants or had infested plants. This is kudzu, the terminal growth of kudzu, and this is what happens when kudzu starts to green up. They start laying egg masses right on the terminals and start colonizing this favorite host plant. And then you've already seen this picture. They can move straight into soybeans. If you get early planted soybeans, we don't have a lot of early planted soybeans out in the southeast, and as I understand it, you guys have a lot of those. This insect doesn't have to have kudzu to survive. As long as there are early planted soybeans, it'll come straight out of overwintering sites as adults and move right into early planted soybeans. So I think you've got kind of a perfect storm set up for this insect out here in the Mid-South. Then it migrates in large numbers to soybeans about midsummer, and it can get very abundant early on. The eggs are laid primarily under leaves, and you can find a lot of egg masses out there. It's very distinct, 2 rows. I think the red-banded stink bug also lays eggs in 2 rows, but it's the egg masses are very distinct. The eggs are kind of pushed over to the side, if you will. The nymphs have this kind of fuzzy appearance, and again, they go through 5 stages on the way to the adult stage. They can be very numerous in the field, as you've seen, all the way up to harvest. Inside the combine, I mean, these things just hang out in the field, and they're just slow to move to overwintering sites. All right, so how does this insect feed? It's not a leaf chewer. It doesn't feed on the pods. This thing is a stem feeder, much like the 3-cornered alfalfa hopper. It just feeds on the stems, the petioles, and it's a stress-inducing pest. It's another factor out there that's stressing the plant, and it can reduce pods per plant, seeds per pod, and seed size. And we did a series of cage experiments to kind of look at that. And what we found is when we infested plants at different different densities of this insect, we did this at mid-vegetative, and then at R6, we went in and counted the number of bugs we have, and in an initial infestation of 5 bugs and 25 bugs per plant, you can see we had quite a few more insects in those cages, and that did translate, when we looked at yield, that did translate into seed weight reduction, kind of a linear relationship with density. So the insects could cause yield loss at these levels. And pretty much this just shows seeds per pod were affected, individual seed weight, and that year, and the same thing the second year, seeds per pod and individual seed weight were significantly affected by these different densities. We published a paper on this. You can read more about the cage work. A colleague in Georgia infested some very small vegetative stage soybeans for 2 weeks, and then he measured plant height. And these things were stunting plants at 5.5 bugs per plant, almost 9 per plant, just for 2 weeks worth of feeding. So they can affect the growth of the soybean for sure. He saw the same thing in another experiment where they infested at different levels and saw a height reduction with this insect. But those early infestations, we've learned, are not as detrimental as the reproductive infestations. He didn't see a difference in yield where he saw a difference in height from those early feedings. So it takes a while for the populations to get going to put enough stress on the plant to hurt yield. Population dynamics, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about spatial distribution of this insect. I just want to point out a few things. In fact, I don't really know what I want to point out on this. It's kind of a messy chart. You can see the eggs here, kind of around R2, R3, kind of a bump there. Kind of the same situation here on another field where they're colonizing the field, laying eggs. But we think that's a magical time for this insect, at least in the southeast. The early reproductive stages, R2, R3, seems to be a preferred crop phenology for this insect. Another observation from studying the spatial distribution of this insect is that they're generally aggregated, a lot like our stink bugs, and we find greater densities on the field edges, particularly early on. So this has implications for management. If this insect's going to show up in large numbers on the edges of the field, what are you going to do? Anybody? Spray the edges, right? So you probably could save a lot of money by spraying field borders initially for this insect, and we're going to work on some of that research this season. Just some interpolation maps showing you how the populations can get very, very thick around the edges of fields. So I think that's a real deal, a real biological thing that we can exploit. We've published a paper on some of the spatial distribution of this insect already. This is an interesting chart from a colleague in Georgia, and it basically just shows population over time in kudzu. And the only thing I want to point out on this chart, these are eggs. The blue is, notice how they just stopped laying eggs around the end of July. It just pretty much quit. There are 2 generations with this insect. So if you can manage both of those generations, I think we'll do a pretty good job. That's probably going to mean 1 or 2 insecticide applications to control this insect. All right, so how do we control it? Chemical control, I'm going to show you some efficacy information. This is from 2011. Most of these charts are going to show kudzu bugs per 20, 25 sweeps, 10 sweeps, or a number per row foot. And of course, the products are going to be across here. Most of the charts are going to be broken up by adults and nymphs. And the only thing I really want to point out on a lot of these efficacy charts is that the materials that have a pyrethroid insecticide seem to do the best job on controlling this insect. I could sum it up with that, but we're going to go through some of these charts. And I can pick out some of the pyrethroids here. Some of the LET materials, tracer, belt, just don't have activity on this insect. Take that out a little bit later. This is at R7, a couple of days after the 3rd application. And again, you can see where the pyrethroid compounds, what they've done, and even some pretty good control out of a neonic and dimethoate here. Another trial, this is kudzu bugs per 12 row feet. Look at that, almost 1,000 per 12 row feet. These are all a pyrethroid, all have a pyrethroid. This is 7 days after the 2nd application at R5, so everything's doing a fine job there. Another trial, pretty much everything in this test is a pyrethroid except for a fungicide alone here. That was just another marker in this test. And again, this is a pretty good number of bugs per 12 row feet. Here's another test. A couple of neonics here, rate response brigade at 4 ounces. This is bifenthrin, and that seems to be the most active compound, the most active pyrethroid on this insect. And that's very fortunate for producers because it's very cheap, bifenthrin. And then there's some other products in here that provided variable control, but again, the pyrethroid compounds, and there are some exceptions there, some subtle differences between some of the pyrethroids, and in fact, there are some that don't work well at all. Here's another trial, and another thing I want to point out on this is that all these products right here have got bifenthrin in them, so they all look pretty good. This is imidacloprid by itself, so imidacloprid's a miss on this insect. And that's a pretty good rate of it. Pyrethroid in this product, this has actually got a pyrethroid and imidacloprid in it, and it was a little weak, and so forth. And again, just some more efficacy charts. Here's Discipline, which is a bifenthrin. Did a really good job on kudzu bugs. For you cotton guys, Transform is your plant bug material. Doesn't work on kudzu bugs, and I'm pretty sure that doesn't have a label in soybeans, but it was in this test just as a marker. And Carbene's another cotton product. No activity on this insect, limited activity. All right, so this final chart on insecticide efficacy in the field is just kind of a summary of several years worth of work, and all of the products that provide very good control of this insect. At least the ones, the top 3 here have bifenthrin in them. Very active ingredient on this insect. And then there are some other pyrethroids that provide pretty good control. You get down to some of these caterpillar materials and they don't have activity on this insect. All right, so how long does that activity last? What about the residual control? So we looked at Petri dish assays where we sprayed plants and we brought the leaves in at different times after we sprayed and then exposed those leaves to the insects. And don't want to spend a lot of time on this either, but this is hours after an insecticide application. This is percent mortality. This is bifenthrin, and this is acephate, orthene. And we had pretty good control with the bifenthrin extending out over a week or so, and it was pretty much gone with the acephate early on. Basically what that says. That was adults. Looking at nymphs, it was pretty much the same thing. We had extended residual control with the pyrethroids, and you guys see that on other insects as well. So that's good to know. Biological control of this insect. We don't get a lot of help from nature with this insect. There are some fungal pathogens that attack insects in general, but we looked at this particular one, Bavaria bassiana, last year. Commercial formulations of it, lab prepared formulations, and it's not going to be something we can rely upon. In fact, I don't think the organic producers are going to be able to use something like that to control this insect. Predators, it's a lot like stink bugs. It just evades a lot of predation. Defensive chemicals secreted by nymphs in aggregate. They just don't have a lot of predators. Parasitoids, here's where we're probably going to get some help from nature. There's a small little wasp that attacks just the eggs of kudzu bugs. That's all it does. We studied this thing in quarantine, working with a scientist in Mississippi. And we were planning on releasing this parasitoid this year. And then the parasitoid showed up in the United States, attacking the insect. So I think we're constantly bombarded with these invasive species. They're just coming into the country, even the natural enemies. So this thing is already established, and it's going to exert some natural control on this insect. It can be some very good control. Here's just a picture of that small little wasp and it coming out of some infested eggs. All right, culture control. This is some really good information here about managing this insect with planting date, variety, and what we did for the last couple of years, we had a trial. We had different maturity groups, different planting dates, and we had sprayed and unsprayed, multiple factors in this test. Very hard to keep weeds under control, Larry, in this kind of situation, but we found something that worked well. If you're going to wait 2 months with bare ground and come back and plant, we had a pretty good recipe for that. Anyhow, let's set these up. This is going to be bushels per acre at 13% moisture. These are planting dates here. This is treated 3 times with a pre-mixed product with a pyrethroid in it and then untreated. So on the maturity group 4s, what we saw here is we saw a significant difference here on the 20th of April planting. We saw the same significant difference on the 18th of May where we planted then. And then the significant difference was gone where we planted on the 5th of July with the maturity group 4s. Looking at the maturity group 5s, it was pretty much the same thing. Where we planted early, we took a significant hit on yield. Where we planted mid-May, we took a significant hit. And where we planted the first week of July, it didn't matter if we sprayed or not sprayed for this insect. And you notice the eggs quit early. Remember I showed you that chart? So this insect is an early season pest. Same thing with the group 6s. Notice our yields are kind of going up for the southeast here with the 6s and 7s. That's why we grow them over there. Significant difference here early and into May, and then no significant difference there, and the same with the 7s. So it's an early season pest. It's going to attack early season planted soybeans. The 2 generations, you're exposing that crop to 2 generations of this insect, so it makes sense. Kind of looking at these data differently, just grouping them by planting date, you can just see when we're planting on the 20th of April, we took a significant yield loss across the board for maturity group. Same thing for the 18th of May. Significant difference across the maturity groups. And then when we planted on the 5th of July, it didn't matter if we sprayed 3 times or not for this insect. So pretty clear. We did that again this year, or last year, 2013. And just notice the difference in these bars here as you go across from planting date. The differences are larger here early, and then they start to erode as you go through the season. So pretty clear planting date effect with this insect. A colleague in Georgia did this very similar trial. He saw the same thing. You can see the difference here erode with planting date. Notice the 76% difference in yield there. That's a lot, isn't it? 76%. And another trial pretty much saw the same thing and so forth. And his trial last year, 73% difference in yield here. Planted early and it erodes as the planting day extends. All right, now this piece of information also from Dr. Philip Robertson, Georgia, is very interesting. He sprayed some plots. He had sprayed plots and unsprayed plots. And he sprayed one time. He sprayed on the 30th of July with indigo at the max rate. And then he went into his untreated plots and his treated plots, and he just counted the insects over time. In the untreated plots, he counted them on the 9th of August and all the way into September here, and you can see the populations increased. He did the same counts in his sprayed plots, and they never came back. So that late application there pretty much zeroed them out, and they weren't a factor after the 30th of July in this test. He repeated this at another site and essentially saw the same thing. One spray on the 30th of July, and he counted in August and into September, and they pretty much just didn't rebound from that late season application or mid-season application. All right, so we've done a lot of work on treatment thresholds and some of this maturity group plant date work, and I don't have a lot of that work summarized yet. We've got to do more analyses on that to kind of nail down a threshold, but we've looked at things like an untreated control, full protection, 1 bug per sweep, 2 bugs per sweep, 1 bug per sweep with nymphs present, and then a single application at beginning pod formation. And what we found out is that the key is to control the nymphs. Control the reproducing populations. If you can get in front of a population that's trying to develop in the field, you can do a pretty good job. We're going to have a number to put with that recommendation here pretty soon, but in this publication, we pretty much read that you've got to time the applications for nymphs, 1 nymph per sweep using a sweep net, or I personally like an observation threshold where you go in the field and you just push back the canopy and look, and if you can easily see hatching nymphs on most of your observations, it's time to spray. And once you kind of hit those things hard, you can evaluate later, and once nymphs come back, second generation, you hit them again. So the pyrethroids provide good control. There is going to be some reinfestation, particularly if you spray too early, and we showed some evidence that you probably don't need to spray too early. Don't let kudzu bugs complete a generation on soybeans. The immatures are definitely important, and I really like this observation threshold. All right, so more information can be found at kudzubug.org or our Clemson website, and I think that's pretty much it.